Okay, let's unpack this. You've shared some really intense material. These are excerpts from a congressional subcommittee hearing.
Yeah, titled Unfair Play, Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports.
And it's laser focused on the world of fencing, specifically USA fencing's policies.
It seems like it should be straightforward, who competes where, but it's really not.
Absolutely not. As we dive into these testimonies and exchanges, you'll see a real clash of perspectives on fairness, safety, inclusion. It's all in there.
So our mission here is really to pull out the core arguments, understand the different viewpoints presented at this hearing.
Right. Cut through some of the noise and give you a clearer picture of this complex and pretty emotionally charged issue in fencing.
What's immediately striking is how the subcommittee chairwoman kind of framed the whole hearing right from the get-go.
How so?
Well, she presented this video compilation. It was meant to show alleged unfairness, even injuries, from biological males competing in women's sports.
Ah, and the volleyball player injury, Peyton McNabb, that was specifically mentioned.
Exactly, cited as a key example. The underlying message seemed pretty clear. They see a problem that needs fixing.
And the chairwoman didn't just leave it at the video, right? She went directly after USA fencing.
She did. Suggested their policies weren't just ignoring science, but maybe even violating federal law.
She mentioned Title IX and the Ted Stevens Act specifically.
Right, and Title IX's, that's the big one about sex-based discrimination in federally funded education programs, including sports.
So the debate is really about how that applies or should apply to transgender athletes.
Precisely. And adding to that, the hearing highlighted this statistic. Something like 200 biological males competing in USA Fencing's women's division.
Wow. And that includes athletes winning national titles, even representing the U.S. internationally in women's fencing.
And the fact that Damon Lefelt, the board chair of USA Fencing, was actually subpoenaed.
Yeah, being subpoenaed definitely signals they viewed this seriously. It's a big challenge to USA Fencing's policies.
Absolutely. And the criticism wasn't just from the committee. They brought up a letter from Andre Giva.
He's a USA Fencing board member, right? And a coach of Olympians, world champions.
That's him. And Giva argued, pretty plainly, that transgender women fencers have significant competitive advantages in women's events.
What kind of advantages did he list?
Things like body size, reach, shoulder width, muscle development, explosive strength, even recovery capacity. He saw these as key differentiators.
And they brought up a UN report too, didn't they? Something about testosterone suppression.
Yeah, suggesting that suppressing testosterone doesn't completely remove all the athletic advantages biological males might have.
Then there was the accusation about USA Fencing prioritizing politics over, well, fencing development.
That was a major point of contention. The chairwoman alleged their choices for national event locations were influenced by state politics.
Specifically, LGBTQ plus rights and abortion policies in those states, using equality maps even.
That was the claim. And it raises that question, what role should social values play for sports bodies? Does it conflict with their main job, promoting the sport everywhere?
And the mention of USA Fencing voting against playing the national anthem, that just added to this narrative of a political agenda.
It certainly fueled that particular argument.
Okay, but there was pushback. The ranking member had a very different take from the start.
Completely different. She called the hearing hateful, a bullying tactic. Basically a distraction from what she saw as more important issues.
So framing it not as oversight, but as a politically motivated attack.
Exactly. Targeting transgender individuals, the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
Her view was it was about bullying trans kids and diverting attention.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at the personal side, the fencers themselves. Stephanie Turner's testimony really brings that human element in.
It does. She started fencing at the University of Maryland, got really involved in the U.S. Fencing Association.
She put in serious time and money, didn't she? Like 7,000 hours, over $100,000 invested?
Yeah, for her, fencing was clearly a huge part of her life, not just a hobby.
And that cherry blossom tournament seems like it was a real turning point.
Definitely. Competing against a biological male in what she expected to be a women's event. She used the word defrauded.
That feeling of unfairness, like the competition wasn't what it was supposed to be.
That seems to be the core of her motivation for speaking out.
And she mentioned this wasn't the first time, right? She'd actively avoided tournaments.
Yes, trying to avoid events where she knew male athletes were registered in the women's category, which meant, missing out on regional and national competitions.
So it directly impacted her ability to compete.
For sure. And her protest, taking a knee at that tournament,
Yeah.
that was very public.
And came with consequences. She talked about harassment, threats of violence, losing friends.
Yeah, it really shows how intense the feelings are, how divided the community is on this.
And ultimately, she felt she had to step away from the sport.
For now, yes. Feeling unwelcome, disenfranchised. Her testimony ended with this really direct call for fair, female-only competition at all levels.
Okay, then we heard from Peyton McNabb, the volleyball player. Her testimony shifted the focus more towards safety.
Right. Her injury was severe. Being hit by that spike from a male athlete identifying as trans, it caused lasting problems. Headaches, balance, vision, even personality changes.
And that personal experience clearly fuels her advocacy now.
Absolutely. She's active nationally, helped pass the Fairness in Women's Sports Act in North Carolina. Her story connects with people worried about safety and fairness.
And she focused on the biological differences argument.
Very much so. She cited statistics from, I think, an independent women's competition report, details on jumping height, throwing distance, speed, strength, all those physical metrics.
Reinforcing the argument that these differences create unfairness and maybe higher injury risks in women's sports.
That was her point.
Yeah.
And she expressed strong support for President Trump's executive order, the one titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports.
And wants similar laws at the state level.
Yes, pushing for state laws she believes protect women's sports.
Now, let's bring in Damon Lefeld, the chair of the USA Fencing Board. He offered a different perspective.
He did. He started by acknowledging how complex this whole gender participation issue is in sports.
And stressed safety and fairness as paramount for USA Fencing.
Right. But he also pointed out that USA Fencing actually has a long history of mixed-gender competition. Men and women competing against each other safely for decades in fencing.
That's an interesting point in the context of fencing specifically.
And he mentioned they consulted widely when developing their transgender policy. Other NGBs, the IOC, USOPC, the International Fencing Federation, the FIE.
And the FIE, the international body, doesn't ban transgender athletes.
According to Leffel, no. And he suggested that if USA Fencing did implement a ban, it might violate the Ted Stevens Act, which governs these national bodies.
Okay, so he's emphasizing their commitment to safety and fairness, but saying their experience in fencing hasn't shown significant extra risks from trans athletes.
Correct. Risks beyond what's normally inherent in single-gender fencing competition.
And he pushed back on the biological advantage argument a bit, too.
He did, suggesting women often have traits like flexibility and agility that are advantages in fencing, and that strategy and technique, things like skill and épée or saber, are often more decisive than raw physical attributes.
Did he offer any data?
He did. He cited USA Fencing data suggesting cisgender women have actually won about 55% of bouts against transgender women where they have data.
Interesting. And he addressed Stephanie Turner's situation.
Yeah, expressed disappointment she took a break, but clarified she isn't banned from the sport.
And he mentioned USA Fencing is willing to adapt.
Prepared to amend policy if laws, research, or international consensus changes. He even mentioned a recently adopted contingent policy for future developments.
What about that site selection policy controversy?
He said it was passed before he became chair. He'd offered an amendment for flexibility on the abortion access issue, aiming for sites safe for everyone.
And he acknowledged a personal blog post.
Yes, where he'd written about his own daughter potentially competing against a transgender woman someday. He owned up to that.
Okay, so a lot from the USA Fencing perspective. Then there was Fatima Gosgraves from the National Women's Law Center.
Right, bringing a legal and social justice angle. She highlighted the NWLC's long history fighting for women's and girls' opportunities, especially since Title IX.
And her position was pretty clear, wasn't it?
Unequivocal. Transgender women don't pose a threat to women's sports. They belong in sports. Period.
And her argument was that focusing on excluding trans kids isn't the way to fix actual inequities in women's sports.
Exactly. She argued that bullying trans kids and creating panic won't solve the real problems.
Did she give examples of harm from anti-trans stances?
She did, denying kids teammates, harassment of Black and brown women who don't fit certain stereotypes, intrusive investigations into girls' gender.
And she mentioned that cyberbullying case. A cisgender athlete mistaken for trans.
Yeah, highlighting how these things can harm people unintentionally, too. Her main point was that exclusion is discrimination and harms all women.
And she tried to shift the focus to other threats.
Right. Lack of resources, sexual abuse in sports, things she sees as the real dangers to women's safety and equality.
You know, beyond the main testimonies, there were some really tense moments in the hearing itself.
Oh, absolutely. The whole question of whether the subcommittee even had the jurisdiction to hold this hearing was hotly debated. That showed the political undercurrent.
And displaying Damon LaFeld's personal social media post, that definitely created tension, the different ways people interpreted it.
For sure. And safety was a constant theme, wasn't it? Turner and McNabb sharing their feelings of being unsafe.
Contrasted with LaFeld presenting USA Fencing's perspective and their data.
And that site selection policy discussion bringing abortion and LGBTQ plus policies into choosing where to hold fencing tournaments, that sparked a lot of debate.
Naturally, and the core disagreement always came back to those fundamental views on biology, advantage, and what fairness actually means in competition.
It really did. And the questioning got personal too, didn't it? Asking Lefeld about his personal views, past online stuff, that Dorothy pseudonym.
Yeah, comments about parents, Trump supporters.
Yeah.
It added another layer.
And the mention of Liz Cabe, the veteran fencer who's a biological male, that specific example highlighted the real-world complexities.
Then the locker room question came up. Biological males in women's private spaces.
Always a sensitive point, touching on privacy and safety concerns beyond just the field of play.
And bringing up Caster Semenya, that reminded everyone this isn't entirely new territory for sports bodies dealing with sex and gender.
No, that case has loomed large over these discussions for years. The whole idea of gender policing in sports.
And they discussed potential consequences for USA Fencing itself under the Ted Stevens Act.
Right, hinting that maybe Congress could step in, given the controversy and the different views.
Though it's worth remembering some committee members felt their time was better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, some argued things like Medicaid cuts were way more pressing than dealing with transgender athletes in, let's face it, a relatively niche sport like fencing. Shows the different priorities even within Congress.
So for you trying to make sense of all this, you've just heard, well, a whole range of perspectives, haven't you?
You really have. Deeply held beliefs about fairness, clashing with inclusion principles, safety concerns versus trans rights, all focused on fencing.
What's fascinating here is how a seemingly specific issue within, the world of fencing becomes this kind of microcosm.
Exactly. A reflection of much broader societal debates about identity, fairness, science, the role of governing bodies. It's all there.
You've seen how personal stories, scientific arguments, legal interpretations like Title IX's, political leanings, they all get tangled up in this one sports issue.
And there are clearly no easy answers. It's obvious this debate in fencing and other sports is going to continue for a while.
This deep dive really raises a crucial question for you to think about. As sports governing bodies like USA Fencing try to navigate these competing demands.
Whose definition of fairness and safety should ultimately win out? And what are the potential consequences, really, of different paths forward for all of the athletes involved?
This segment of the Deep Dive was brought to you by Fencing Family, an Etsy shop based in Los Angeles offering fencing-themed apparel and accessories. You can find them at https.fencingfamily.etsy.com.